Oh, it's the phone.
Oh, it's ringing.
Who's there? Could it be?
Hello?
McDonald's.
Yeah, can I order some food for delivery, please?
I don't do delivery, I'm afraid.
Can I have a Wenton with fries? Do you do any anything with cheese on top?
Who was that? What was that?
It was the past.
The past. Hello and welcome to In the Court of the Wenton King. We're doing a new band today, aren't we?
Yeah.
What's that band?
Quite an obscure band.
Yeah, no one's ever really heard of them, so...
Called.
Called Pink Floyd. Strange name.
Yeah.
So we're going to review one of their obscure albums from years ago. This thing, it's called Dark Side of the Moon. It's a good album. Do you think it's a good album?
I think it's a pretty good album.
Yeah, in fact, it's a very good album. Yes, so I'm going to give this 6 eggs. What do you give it?
I'll give it 6 eggs.
6 eggs as well. There you go.
It's a 6-egg album.
So there you go. That's our review of Dark Side of the Moon.
That is our first 6-egg album.
That's our first 6 egg album. There you go. So anyway, while we're here, the secret word for today is pudding. So anyway, while we're here, I thought maybe we'll do a review of a kind of a bootleg. It isn't a, this is a strange kind of bootleg in that it's a recording of a radio. So obviously the sound quality is tremendously good by bootleg standards. Of the 1971 recording from the Paris Theatre on September the 30th. This is your first delve into bootleg territory, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't really... bootlegs have always seemed to me a bit of a quirky thing. They are really sort of... It's really sort of fanboy territory.
Yeah, really.
And I just don't get... Well, I don't understand... Or I don't feel I get much out of delving into it in that kind of depth. The only thing I could see it possibly doing is bursting the bubble, you know, the veneer of perfection of a band. If I'm really into a band that much, if I delve into bootlegs, I'll probably find something that I don't really want to find.
Yeah, Led Zeppelin.
So it's a better, it's Pandora's box. Don't open the box because it's bad.
I mean this one is significant, partially because of the sound quality, but also because it has what I think is the best version of a song that wasn't properly released until a compilation in the 80s or something. So that's interesting. With the Embryo. This was presented on John Peel's show. I don't think it's Top Gear. It's not Top Gear. What was the show?
It's called John Peel Presents.
John Peel Presents. Music shows, yeah. John Peel's music show. He seems very polite about Pink Floyd, actually, which surprises me a bit. I thought by then he'd hate them, but maybe after Dark Side of the Moon he'd hate them. It's a real transitional period for the band. And what's really interesting is you've got the 1970 performance at the same venue. I assume recorded with the same equipment, so you hear the development from 70 to 71, and it is at exactly the right moment where something's changing, and you hear them get together basically on this performance. They are now together. They know what they should sound like. They know how to do it, and they're relatively tight about it. You know, only if you go right way back to like the Man in the Journey, 1969, that's a very different story. You've also got the live performance on Ummagumma, but obviously that was selected carefully for the best performances, which is great as well. So at this point, they're getting it together live. They're starting to put things together.
Well, you've got to remember they were sort of forged in the belly of 1967, the Summer of Love. Their album was number 2 to Sgt. Pepper's. You would not expect a band that sort of found itself in that period to be making songs or albums like Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall. Mm-hmm. You know, a decade later. But here you can really hear it. You can really find the track. That sort of melancholy is creeping in. The soundscapes, because they've got a very unique sound, haven't they, Pink Floyd? Mm-hmm. And although it was unique in 1967, it was unique in a sort of... It was Syd Barrett unique.
Yeah, it was quirky.
Yeah.
Which is a very different thing, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas this is much more compositional.
Yeah, a lot of it is about structure, certainly at this point anyway, but also about the songs, which is Roger Waters' thing. Strangely, Atom Heart Mother was number 1 in the UK. It was a big hit, obviously partially because of the sort of gimmick of it, of having an orchestra on a big piece. But you could certainly argue that they were out of their comfort zone trying to write something like that and also perform something like that. But I think that the success of that probably gave them a bit of a boost and got them focused, because you would assume them to fade away slowly, you know. But then their fame went back up again for whatever reason, and you can hear it in the performance that they're much more self-assured by 70.
I actually quite like Atom Heart Mother. It's obviously not my favourite, but you kind of get a sense that the difference between Atom Heart Mother and Dark Side of the Moon is quite big, but it's an accumulation of of small improvements, if you know what I mean. So there's lots of small improvements, and that you can tell by the performance of one of the songs on here, they're constantly improving their sound and constantly reworking them and sort of honing them.
Yeah.
I think this is the real genius of Pink Floyd, and I think this could be where it could come on slightly undone listening to bootlegs. If you listen to an earlier version of a song, it could be quite upsetting, because obviously
It doesn't do what you want.
by the time they get to the album, Dark Side of the Moon or whatever, they've actually really sort of honed it and made it booker.
What else is interesting is that they call themselves the laziest band in the world, and I think that's part of the reason why it worked in a way. In that they would faff around studio time, making silly noises, and just they recorded a track called Nothing, Nothing 2, Nothing 3, and of course Return of the Son of Nothing was an amalgamation of all these farting around bits and pieces, and it's that architecture thing which enabled them to actually construct a big piece out of that in the way that they couldn't really do with Atom Heart. They could do with that kind of thing. Simpler music, but structurally just as complex. So yes.
Very difficult to review Pink Floyd.
Yes. So, first song.
Fat Old Son.
Fat Old Son. I really like Fat Old Son. I think it's the best thing on Atom Heart Mother. I like the way it's developed over time and turned into this jam and stuff like that. It's the only time where I think that the Gilmour song is better than the Roger Waters song. I mean, If is alright, quite like If, but there's an element of Grantchester Meadows about it, I find Grantchester Meadows incredibly boring. Fat Old Son, when you can see they started going in this folky direction. It's a great song. It's one of Gilmour's best compositions. There aren't many. That's one of his best songs. That is. And I love the way that extended it into a jam. Yeah. They extended everything into a jam, obviously, but I think it works really nicely.
There's quite a few big songs in this set list. It's only 5 songs in the set list, but this is the most memorable one. This being the first time I've listened to it. I think it stands out because it is a little bit different. There's a more positive vibe to it. You could almost imagine like George Harrison's influence on this, sort of like an ode to the nice old son, sort of type thing to it, and it sort of evokes old Pink Floyd to me. So it's got one foot in sort of the '67 and the '60s Pink Floyd, and one foot in the sort of the way they were going, and it sounds really sort of and a little bit different.
Yeah.
Good different.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is his voice developed. He's much more self-assured. You listen to the album version, it's very subdued, whereas here he's much more self-assured in the vocals, and it helps a lot with the song. It makes it, when you listen to the 1970 version, it's just too twee, because he's so quiet. And that's one of the things that makes it work. But the other thing, obviously, is the jam in the middle. He's excellent.
Very well worth a listen.
Next song. One of these days I'm going to cut you into little pieces. Interesting early version. I would take this over the version on, I'm going to say Up Pompeii then, on Live at Pompeii. And I think it might be because the drums are lower in the mix. But to me it just sounds better. It sounds more energetic. And the one on Live at Pompeii for me sounds a bit stilted. I don't know what it is about it, but that version never worked for me.
Yeah, I think it's definitely in need of finishing off, because it doesn't sound as good as sort of like later versions that appeared in later sets.
No. Actually, the best versions are with the Gilmour band, because there's no vocals, there's no lyrics.
Yeah.
So you don't need Roger Waters there, really. You just need a cool bass player.
Yeah. But it's nice to hear it on there. It's always a good song live.
Yeah. You can't really go wrong with it, can you? You didn't get the ode to Doctor Who at this point, of course.
Which is a bit disappointing.
Yeah.
I was waiting for it.
Yeah, but I don't think they did that till the 80s.
Next song?
Embryo. The Embryo. Yeah, now this is the worth the price of admission, because obviously this was a song that was kind of never released, and it was an original version put on a compilation. I believe that original version was just a demo, and they didn't intend it for release, and it ended up on some sampler or something sent to radio stations, and they were really annoyed about them. And I think that's why they didn't actually put it on an album in the end. Like you were saying about Fat Old Son, I mean, I like Embryo because it's kind of 60s Pink Floyd and 70s Pink Floyd. It straddles the two very well. I suppose it's maybe a little bit too much like Set the Controls. Maybe that's the problem in vibe. I mean, musically it's not the same. It's kind of like the sequel to it in a way.
It's interesting on there in the sense that it's a bit of a peculiarity. It's not one of their big, a bit like as you say, Fat Old Son. It's not one of their big songs from their catalogue. You wouldn't expect to go to a concert, let's say they form now, you wouldn't expect Fat Old Son or the Embryo to be on there. Yeah, they're good. They're really good.
It's strange. Whereas usually when you do it with Pink Floyd, just a year previous, or certainly a year before that, the forgotten songs aren't good.
Yeah.
Really. Well, I mean, obviously fans are going to like them, but they're not great songs. Whereas this stuff is great. So it's odd that Embryo, which was written in '68 or '69, I think, maybe '69, was actually never ended up on an album. The original version is just the folky strumming song. I think Gilmour sings it. Obviously, it's written by Roger Waters, but obviously you hear how it's developed over time. The 1970 version, the middle section's a little bit boring. Not a lot happens. They've got some sounds of children playing and laughing. And I think the idea was at the concert they'd have that going round, the quadraphonic sound. People would be like, "Where's that coming from?" Yeah. Which I think when they weren't using that, Roger Waters replaced it with his Scottish shouting several species of small furry animals. But that's not here at this point. I think it was a much more. It's like they took it much more seriously on this one. So this is kind of the definitive version, and it's good all the way through. It's about 12 minutes.
Very long.
Which is interesting, obviously, because they played that right next to the next song, which is a preview of their new song. In 1970 they did a preview of their new song, where they needed orchestras to play it, controversially. But this preview of the new song, of course, is Echoes. It's fully formed here, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it's considered a very good version of it. I like it because you can tell it wasn't completely set in stone, and I was really surprised to hear Rick Wright playing with the melodies a bit and improvising it, which makes it really nice. Is it as good as the Pompeii version? Don't know. I'd say it's better than the 74 versions, 74, 75 version, which are also interesting. But the bits I like are there's the first guitar-y bit, so the bit before the verse, then you've got the funky guitar-y bit, when he's really going with the whammy bar, and it's all that stuff. And also it's the very, very end, which is just the very quiet jamming between the keyboard and guitar. Those are the bits I listen out for in a live performance of Echoes. They're the interesting bits that are always different, and they are good here.
I mean, the live at Pompeii version is probably more recognisable as sort of like Echoes, the Echoes that you listen to from the album.
Yeah.
Whereas this is a little bit different, therefore it's probably slightly more interesting. But the live at Pompeii version is probably a slightly better performance. That is probably actually the recording equipment.
It could, and the vibe of the video as well, and all that, and the sound.
But I mean, it is an absolutely awesome song. It is one of their best songs. Yeah, it's just good to be on there.
It is. I mean,
you say, really.
In a way, it's a definitive Pink Floyd piece of music. I mean, later on we are going to talk about Dogs in a couple of weeks. Often Dogs is my favourite Pink Floyd track, but Echoes is kind of definitive, and it's a band track. They all wrote this song. It's a four-way, meaningful thing. And Roger Waters wrote the song. The song was only a bit of it, obviously. And Rick Wright came in with those chords and with that little progression, and obviously the ping. And Dave Gilmour, the guitar-y stuff, the funky bit, he wrote that. And Nick Mason is on it as well.
I always find the subject on Echoes quite, because it's basically a bit of a love song with some weirdness. Something climbs towards the sun, kind of weirdness. Which isn't very Roger Waters-y, introspective, kind of
I think it is.
tormented soul type.
I think it
stuff.
Apart from If, which is kind of an introduction to that stuff. Strangers passing in the street, whatever, that stuff. That comes from his situation at the time when Barrett had left, and he was living in London, and it was a very sort of lonely. So many people, and yet no communication, and that's kind of his whole thing, isn't it? That's
Yeah, I suppose.
But it's also about being underwater and things as well. So.
and stuff.
And stuff. Great
song.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you consider. Yeah, I mean, you just got to consider. It's 1971. It's 4 years since '67, and Bike, Lucifer Salmon.
Yeah.
Arnold Lane and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What a transformation.
It's unbelievable. It's very strange, isn't it? It's just chance meeting of chance people in a very, very unlikely situation leads to some of the best music ever. Literally.
Blues song, is it?
Blues. Yeah, It's just a blues jam. Strange thing for them to do as an encore. I mean, obviously, particularly Roger Waters wasn't too happy about playing some of those earlier songs. So maybe it's an answer to that rather than having to play On a Lane or something. It's just a blues jam, and you really hear how sloppy their playing is. I mean, we're talking about them being the laziest band in the world, where they just can't be bothered, and they just do little bits and fart around and make silly noises. And it's sort of, you can hear it in their performance, and it suits the music so well of Echoes and things like that. And here you can hear it, and it's strange that the sort of master of understatement, Dave Gilmour, he's really heavy-handed here, bending the notes and bow, 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 bow. I don't know. I think it's supposed to be just fun. Maybe that's the idea.
Yeah, I mean, Dave Gilmour is like a blues guitarist.
Yeah.
Obviously doing something that he likes, but probably a little bit different. And it's probably just his release, isn't it? Let's go and have some fun and
have a bit of fun at the end.
But I mean, it's alright, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's a blues jam, isn't it? Yeah. And you can't really go wrong with it. I mean, there's no gavel with that axe. Very weird because it was so good by this point.
So what did you think of the album, the performance as a whole then, Kev?
I think it's great. It's amazing how they've just got it together. In the space of that year, they've got it together. I don't know if it's because they had a #1 album and it sort of inspired them and made it a bit more real that they could achieve. But they've also been writing better stuff, so it was worth performing it well. That's really interesting. It's great. It's worth getting for Embryo because it's the definitive version of Embryo. And obviously the sound is fantastic for a bootleg. What did you think of it?
I actually enjoyed listening to it. I was a little bit sceptical to start with because I was a bit worried about sound quality and being disappointed.
Horrified at how rubbish they were.
Undermining my musical heroes. Actually, it's kind of augmented it in a curious way because some of the songs are in development, and I know where they where it ended up. It kind of gives you that sense of how much they are actually honing the songs and how much they're improving them over the years or over the performances. I think someone in there is a real perfectionist. Now, I would assume it's Roger Waters, but I actually get the sense that it's more than just Roger Waters. I think they all had quite high standards, although they're lazy.
At this point, it is a band. It is 4 people.
Yeah, I think they have incredibly high standards, and I think that's what drove them to produce some of the music they did, because they're not fantastic musicians
compared to the contemporaries.
I mean, you think, Led Zeppelin and some of the proggy stuff going around at that time. You got
at this point they would have been compared to King Crimson and Yes and that kind of stuff. And sort of having a year off to practice, they couldn't do that. They had to find something else, and they did big time.
They did it by writing really, really good songs and really, really working on them and making them.
How should we do it? I know, let's write really good songs. It's the best music in the world. Let's do that.
There's a certain elegance to it. It's quite simple, yet it's just awesome.
Yeah.
It's goodness without complexity.
Yeah. So egging is difficult, obviously. With a bootleg, but obviously these are to a different standard. These are different eggs. Okay, these are
bootleg eggs.
Bootleg eggs. Yeah, bootleg eggs. And obviously, sound quality comes into it. Original, unavailable song comes into it. Performance comes into it. So this one has to have 5 eggs because it scores very highly on all those traits for me. So 5 eggs for that.
That's a high standard.
It's a high egg.
It's a high egg count. We start bootleg run on a high egg count. What's important in a bootleg for me? Sound quality, yeah. Yeah, it's got to be 5 eggs, Kev.
Yeah, because it's got everything in it.
Yeah.
It's the perfect bootleg.
Well, there you have it.
Yep, thank you very much. Join us next week for a bootleg we haven't decided yet. So surprise! See you next week.
Bye bye. Give us some likes.